Hi there. Showrunner Ryan Condell recently confirmed in his podcast that House of the Dragon will end with season 4. Though we had speculated a bit recently that it might have a fifth season, now it's totally confirmed that word for word, season 4 is the final season. But we don't really have a problem with this announcement as such. I mean, it raises several questions, but it's complicated. I'm sorry I'm dashing this off as an audio-only podcast because there's so much going on in the lead up to the premiere of Dunk and Egg, but it's still very important. For context, at a press conference back in late November, HBO announced a double renewal for new seasons of both A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms and House of the Dragon through 2028. And they said House of the Dragon Season 4, renewing it half a year before Season 3 even comes out. It'll be 2028. Now, at the time, HBO chief Casey Bloys seemed to prominently imply that Season 4 is not necessarily the official final season, because he stressed that he was leaving it up to the writers. That whereas before they had outright said it is the final season, we thought they had planted a reporter who pointed out, you just omitted that it's the final season, you used to stress that, and he said, well, we're leaving it to the writers. I am not the only one who suspected that he was trying to signal that we're going to get more than season 4. I'm not the only one who said this. It's not just my empty speculation here, but what I said at the time in a video, which I'm going to take down now, is that we hoped for another season to make up for the episode count that we lost when they slashed from 10 episode seasons to 8 episodes starting in season 2. Now, originally they said 4 seasons of 10 episodes each, so we need 40 episodes. The way to get to that count again, given that season 3 is already finished, is, I thought this was reasonably plausible, have a supersized 150% season, a supersized season 4 that's 14 episodes. That would get us back up to 40 and air it in 2 blocks of 7. You might even call them Season 4 and Season 5, just with fewer episodes. Not greedy, not asking for a giant extension, just to give us back what we had. That's not happening now. We might, you never know, they might give us 10 episodes again for Season 4. I won't rule that out, but nothing that would be functionally a 5th season. Because just this past week, Ryan Condell confirmed in his podcast, he has this regular podcast, but he's a movie props collector, and sometimes he'll talk about things related to the Westeros franchise. He said in his podcast this week, word for word, Season 4 will in fact be, quote, the final season. This actually didn't come as a giant surprise to us because since that HBO panel in late November, for the past month or so in December, we had been hearing rumblings that, no, it really is the end. That in the previous podcast episode, Ryan Condell mentioned in passing that, oh, I just bought a house in the United States, I'm going to move back there in a year to a year and a half. That he moved to the UK to oversee House of the Dragon when Season 1 began, and he's been living there ever since, and they say it's a strain on your family and stuff, that he wants to move back when it's done. And looking at the schedule of, well, if Season 4 films in 27 to air in 28, that I don't think they'd be filming a supersized season then or anything. So we had about 2 or 3 weeks where we were processing what if there is a 5th season and gaming that out. And then another 2 or 3 weeks where we were pondering, okay, it's starting to look like no, there isn't, and weighing both options. And that really helped. We needed that to consider it. So that softened the blow. We already thought out the implications of all of this, so we weren't surprised. It gave us time to think about what renewal would mean, and that's where this gets complicated. I'm going to be discussing mega spoilers here, unavoidably discussing mega spoilers involving major character deaths that you could consider the end point of a series. Okay, so this is my final warning for anyone who might complain about that. I inherently need to talk about character deaths. In short, we're talking about whether to end the story when Rhaenyra dies. When Rhaenyra and Daemon die, because they both die around the same time, though in different circumstances. They die before the Civil War ends. They're not alive during the final phase. Basically, short version, after Rhaenyra and Daemon die, there's this last campaign of the war culminating in the Battle of the King's Road, which is nicknamed the Muddy Mess. The victorious Black armies besiege King's Landing. Aegon's small council poisons him rather than let the city be destroyed, open the gates, and then there's this short period called the Hour of the Wolf, where Cregan Stark, with a big fresh army of Northerners in the capital, decides what to do with everyone. Now, collectively, a lot of us refer to this entire period from Rhaenyra's death, through the Muddy Mess, through the crowning of her son Aegon III, as just the Hour of the Wolf, after the chapter title. Specifically, the Hour of the Wolf is when Cregan is there after Aegon dies, but you'll hear us loosely calling all of this the Hour of the Wolf, this overlap period between when Rhaenyra dies and when her son is crowned king, but he's underage. Because then there's this whole new prequel era about the reign of her son. Specifically because he's underage, that they know going in he's 10, we're going to have a 6-year-long regency before he even reaches the age of adulthood. So they put together a regency council with members from both sides of the war as a compromise. And we call this prequel era, okay, the last one was the Dance of the Dragons. The one before that was the Sons of the Dragon era. This is the Regency era, or the Aftermath era. It's this really chaotic period of plotting between the rival regents on the small council. Westeros itself is still in chaos. The fighting never even ended between the Lannisters and Greyjoys on the west coast. That goes on for years. Then a plague breaks out, the winter fever, so that really degenerates into chaos. Wildlings then use the opportunity to invade the north, so Cregan would have a lot to do with that. And because the Triarchy falls apart into civil war, it turns into this chaotic war in the Free Cities called the Daughters' War that involves eventually all 9 of them, basically, with constantly shifting alliances that ultimately pull in the Valyrian fleets. So it's an interesting time period and actually does have source material to draw on, the later chapters of Fire and Blood. And we have been trying to analyze this question since before Season 1. I have made videos on this since back when Condell was making his first comments. What does Ryan Condell consider the end point? I already concluded even then, maybe we already got a feeling he was going to end it earlier instead of later, in terms of choosing the stopping point, which isn't necessarily wrong. Because an issue is Fire and Blood is an in-universe history book, and history just keeps going. You know, it's not like a novel where you can go, yup, this is the end point, Tyrion kills Tywin at the end of book 3. It just keeps going, and particularly in this case, there's a large degree of overlap. By the time Rhaenyra dies, several other major characters are still alive who only die during the Hour of the Wolf. Aegon. Larry Strong. Alicent is still alive at the end of the Hour of the Wolf, though her story's basically over. She's in house arrest. Corlys Velaryon lives for a bit after that. He's still alive. I mean, he dies soon after that just from old age. I mean, he's like 80 by that point, but characters are still alive then. Some of them die relatively early in the Regency. Other ones have a lot more to do. So we've always said, well, the Hour of the Wolf is this bizarre overlap period where is this season 1 of the Regency show or is it season 5 of House of the Dragon? This was always a question we were facing. And this is paralleled in some ways by how we got the first story for all of this, that the way it was released was first as a novella back in 2013, that Martin was writing these sidebars for the World of Ice and Fire, and he knew what the rest of the story was, but When he put out the novella The Princess and the Queen in 2013, it ends with Rhaenyra's death. Well, Daemon dies and she dies. And then it doesn't explain what happened to everyone else. What happened to Alicent? What happened to Aegon? He's just killed Rhaenyra. He's still alive out there. Now what happens? We had to wait a year until the World of Ice and Fire sourcebook in 2014 to even get a gloss of what happened. Briefly. So it wasn't even really until 4 years after that, 2018, when Fire and Blood came out, that we got the full chapters on what happened next. So for a long time, that's how the story ended, and think of that animated featurette they put out with the Blu-rays in Game of Thrones Season 5. It was this 20-minute condensed version of the Dance of the Dragons, and if you were going to make a 20-minute version, it's good. I mean, they'd leave out entire storylines, like they wouldn't even mention Oscar Tully or something. But in terms of this is the story of Rhaenyra, starting with Viserys' death and ending with Rhaenyra's death, for 20 minutes, like I've said, it's as if you made a gloss of the War of the Five Kings that focused on Robb Stark and Cersei, and cut out everything like the Greyjoys and the Baratheons and other stuff, but it would be coherent as a condensed version. People liked that. It was really exciting. It built up interest that this is a good prequel era. It's interesting. So, thinking of that animated featurette that chose to end when the Princess and the Queen does, that Rhaenyra died, also because Fire and Blood wasn't out yet, basically our current situation is that Ryan Condell is going the Princess and the Queen route, which, to be honest, we'd suspected he might do since comments he made before Season 1, that he's focused on the story of Rhaenyra. So when he says, I want to get to the end of the story, he's talking about the story of Rhaenyra. This is not necessarily wrong. It's not what I would have done, but this is not a crazy thing. That big point here. Thinking on this long and hard, the direct analogy I'm thinking of is with Star Wars, with the Clone War as a major event within the fictional universe. Like if this was in a history book first, the way we got it, and then you're saying, well, how do I depict this and present what happened in movies and television? The core movie trilogy focuses on just the primary players in the conflict. Anakin, Padme, Obi-Wan, Palpatine, Dooku. These are major figures, but this is a galaxy-spanning conflict that you can have all sorts of side stories and subplots, which they eventually did expand to in the Clone Wars animated series. Like, some episodes don't focus on the core characters at all, or they're really just to show, and here's this other front in the war that we didn't have time to explain. Things like that. And on top of it, after the Clone War ends, do we have a direct sequel show? They did. They had The Bad Batch, which was a direct sequel covering the aftermath. Just as we're wondering, should you have a direct sequel beyond Hour of the Wolf and covering the Regency? So by way of analogy of the Clone War as a fictional event and the Dance of the Dragons as a fictional event, they're bigger than any one TV show or one movie trilogy could depict in its entirety. So thinking of it in those terms, okay. But what really, really made me surprisingly okay with this and not freaking out now is, like I said, I've had a few weeks to mentally process both scenarios. First, when we thought we'd get a Season 5, and then hearing for a while we might not, and now just getting confirmation. Because for the 2 or 3 weeks in early December where we thought maybe it wouldn't be the final season, I had time to game out in my head that even given absolute power as a fan, if I was made showrunner, no budget limits, if I could do whatever I wanted, just wish listing, I realized that there's simply only 2 more seasons worth of material for Rhaenyra and Daemon. They had very little to do in Season 2 because they don't do much at that point in the book, but then they have a lot to do. And it's about 2 seasons worth. And just playing around with it, pen and paper and in my head, I realized anything more than 2 more seasons with those characters would be stretching them thin and dilute the quality. I mean, look at what Benioff and Weiss did to Cersei in the last seasons. Her story should have ended at the close of Season 6, but Instead, they basically just copy-pasted her into the story of the Golden Company and young Griff. They stole the young Griff, John Connington, Golden Company storyline and just reassigned it to Lena Headey to, oh, well, we don't want to get rid of Lena, we love Cersei too much. It made no sense. The wife of the dead king declaring herself queen and that people would actually consider her the legitimate queen, like the Tarleys, that isn't a thing. That made no sense. And it reduced her to, as it became a meme, she's just staring out a window sipping wine and in this evil Snow White evil queen costume. So it wasn't really advancing Cersei as a character, and it was just appropriating a story role that would have gone to young Griff and Connington and everything, and it was really bad. That diluted it. Or other characters like Brienne that they didn't want to develop nor did they want to kill off, so they just were hovering in the background with that much to do. So I had a good long time to think about this for myself, and please tell me in the comments your thoughts of, I never seriously thought that Rhaenyra and Daemon would die at the end of the 5th season, even if we got one. That would be stretching them thin. So I'm okay with that. That's not really what we're asking here. What we're worried about is, will they have them die at the end of season 4, which there's enough material that should be the end point, because that's how The Princess and the Queen ends. Or will Condell try to cram The Hour of the Wolf into season 4? So we've only got 4, because it's an 8-episode season or something, so we only got 4 or 5 episodes of everything Rhaenyra does between the first battle of Tumbleton, which is when season 3 ends, and her death, and then cram everything that happens in The Hour of the Wolf, with the Battle of the King's Road and all this other stuff into only 4 or 5 episodes after that. That would be severely truncating the story. And it might not be impossible, but it'd be extremely difficult, and I'm really worried they're going to do that. I would rather that they just end with pretty much how the animated featurette ended, where they have a voiceover clearly meant as a sequel hook, glossing over, but after Rhaenyra's death, Aegon didn't reign for long, but that's the story of her son more than it is here, so let's make a chapter break, or something like that, of just signaling the death of Rhaenyra is the end of this story and the beginning of another one. And what the real thing we're worried about is one sentence, will we get a Regency show as a direct sequel? In which case, fine, cover The Hour of the Wolf in season 1 of an Aftermath show, Regency show. Well, Tom Glencarny would come back as Aegon, Matthew Needham would come back as Larry for 1 season. The first season, Alicent would probably die late season 2, she dies of natural causes, as the story advances on a scale of years. But why not do that? You know, that I hope that first season of a Regency show is The Hour of the Wolf, and that season 4 just ends with Rhaenyra's death, because this is really what Benioff and Weiss should have done. Hand off control to another showrunner when they feel they are done. That they really only wanted to get through the Red Wedding. And it's so annoying in retrospect how cynically they'd say, even in season 1, well, we're really excited about getting up to the Red Wedding. And once we get to the Red Wedding, we're locked in. And they realized once we get through season 3, we can start phoning it in. Now, obviously, because people forget that season 4 was already written when the Red Wedding aired, so the first season that they half-assed was season 5. That's the first one written after the Red Wedding. And we just kept hoping, why aren't they handing this off to another showrunner? Pride, they want this to be their achievement, even though they don't want to put work into it. So, I mean, other cinematic universes, Star Wars, Marvel, even Walking Dead projects, like other long-form things, shift showrunners over time, or Star Trek, for example. So the best case scenario that can happen for us, what I hope is happening, is Ryan Condell wanted to be showrunner on The Story of Rhaenyra, leave when Rhaenyra's story is finished, and hand off the reins to some new showrunner, who will then pick up with Hour of the Wolf in what is technically a direct sequel, but functionally season 5. That's okay, and we can debate the odds of that happening or not. I'm just saying, all is not lost. That's not impossible. We could debate how plausible it is, but maybe. It's odd discussing this now because we're still living in the backlash to season 2, which was divisive due to being affected by the strike and studio meddling, literally cutting off the ending. So don't base it on your opinions now. I mean, what really matters is if season 3 and then season 4 can return to near season 1 levels of quality. They could. You can't say that for sure if they will or not, but they could. After season 3, that will determine is there demand for a direct sequel. Because after season 1 was great, people going, oh yeah, I hope they do a Regency show eventually. Nothing succeeds like success. If it's really good again and the people are clamoring for it, we'll probably get it. I mean, remember how after Game of Thrones ended, there were still all those silly calls for, can we have an Arya sequel? What? With zero source material? You're just a Maisie Williams fanboy. There's nothing to do. In contrast, there's quite a bit of source material for the Aftermath show. We're asking them, can you adapt the final chapters that are in Fire and Blood, that looking at them, it's like 2 chapters per season. You could get 3 or 4 seasons out of that, maybe 5, if you go past the Regency and cover the rest of the reign of Aegon III, because Fire and Blood ends, just cuts off when his Regency ends, but you can tell they're building up to the death of the final dragons, this final confrontation, and what the heck Alice Rivers is up to that will involve that. With allegedly Aemon's son and a dragon of her, so he's probably going to get the cannibal, something like that. So yeah, I can see like 4 or 5 season show maybe on the Regency, and it'll be smaller scale, but that also means it's cheaper to make. So fine, character piece. Yes, I'm just, can you adapt this into something as opposed to make a sequel for the sake of a sequel? No, there is a sequel. I want you to adapt it. Also, I mentioned the analogy of Star Wars with the Clone War, that if you presented an entire event like that, do you cover the Clone War as this sprawling 20-hour-long thing covering every front of the war, or do you make a movie trilogy focused on the central players like Obi-Wan, like Palpatine, then leave side stories for other things? Well, I think a Regency show would be great because it shifts more focus away from the Targaryens, who are still important, but spreads it out from the Targaryens more to the other great houses, which the stripped-down Princess and the Queen version of House of the Dragon really didn't do, and that's a choice, I understand, but more focus on the Starks, the Lannisters, the Greyjoys, all of that, while at the same time, like, Alan of Hull is Lord of House Velaryon, Admiral of the Royal Navy, Master of Ships on the Small Council. At the same time, Jane Arryn is a member of the Regency Council, so they'd be more prominent. So, mentally picture scenes of... seriously, mentally picture Alan Velaryon as Master of Ships at the Small Council discussing with Jane Arryn how to react to the Civil War in the Free Cities. In short, I'm asking for an HBO show starring Abu Bakr Salim and Amanda Collin. Like Raised by Wolves. Please, give us more of that. But I actually realized another really good analogy would actually be between Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Because Breaking Bad is focused on Walter White and ends with his death, but didn't develop as many side characters to as much of an extent and didn't really cover what happened after that. Well, it's mostly a prequel, but ends as a sequel. There are some sequel elements to it, but Better Call Saul spreads the story out more. It's a bit more of an ensemble. Yes, the main focus is on Saul Goodman, but there is a lot more development in Better Call Saul for Gus Fring, for Mike Ehrenstrout. These guys you thought were relatively minor characters beyond that get rounded out in Better Call Saul. So a Regency show would be our Better Call Saul. Except instead of being mostly prequel, it's mostly sequel. I mean, we even had, by extension, they had to wrap up Jesse's story in a TV movie, El Camino. So, fine, you wanted to focus on Rhaenyra. My only real complaint about Season 2 that we really couldn't dismiss or explain was they barely used Kragan Stark. Then in terms of other things were bad, but you could explain, oh, well, the strike affected it. They're really the least defensible was they chose not to really round out the Starks in this era, when in the book, Jace does a lot more with Kragan Stark. He's a bit more prominent. Kragan is more prominent again in the Regency show. He has an interesting backstory about how his uncle usurped him when he was a child. He had to fight to take back control of the North. Jane Arryn, similarly, she came to rule young. Her male cousins keep trying to usurp her. Not like a season's worth of content, but I'm thinking, if we got a Regency show, why not have like a full episode devoted to the backstory of Kragan Stark? Like starting with a child actor, then advancing to when the war happens. Why not do that? I mean, just in terms of brainstorming for TV shows, Game of Thrones rarely used flashbacks. And House of the Dragon used time skips, but that's still linear. But other shows will introduce characters, then show their interesting backstory with like a full flashback episode. Better Call Saul did that a lot, even within the prequel. You'd see side stories. Breaking Bad itself, they try to show things that happened earlier with other people. You can do that. Or Walking Dead would also do that, where they'd introduce a new character, then there'd be a mostly flashback episode explaining what their interesting backstory was. You can do that for Kragan, for Jane. And there'd be more Lannister representation in the form of Jason Lannister's widow, Joanna Westerling Lannister, leading the war against the Greyjoys, and give flashbacks to what she was doing during the war and then up to this. So you'd be playing around with the narrative format a little bit, but to make it a character piece, that a big selling point of a Regency show is you'd see more Starks and Lannisters than you had in the Targaryen-heavy House of the Dragon. And certain elements which I was annoyed they skipped to focus on Rhaenyra in the main show, they could at least plausibly make up for in a differently structured direct sequel that also has flashbacks in it. Maybe not flashbacks. Tell me in the comments. I'm comparing this to Better Call Saul, but maybe even just have a dialogue scene if they're so committed to no flashbacks. Just invent a scene where Kragan Stark is explaining to Black Aly Blackwood, this is what my backstory is, in present-day dialogue. Okay, you want to keep it that way, fine. Maybe, because the wildlings attack, maybe his uncle's sons, his first cousins that tried to usurp him with his uncle, maybe he gave them the option to join the Night's Watch. He's the kind of guy who lets people join the Night's Watch if they surrender. Maybe when he goes to defend the wall against the wildlings, he runs into his cousins in the Night's Watch and it comes up in dialogue. We can play around with this. There's multiple suggestions of how to do this. Flashback or dialogue, but yeah, a Regency show would have a decent amount of material to spread out to the secondary characters in the great houses, Starks and Lannisters and everything. Oscar Tully would probably be merged. He'd take over the story role of Bloody Ben, who goes on to do things in the Vale and stuff. He'd be prominent too. Alice Rivers, of course, would have stuff to do. But thinking on it, this is a good idea. Even though I don't think HBO itself knows if they're going to do this right now. Both because of the backlash to Season 2 and because of the upcoming potential mega merger with either Netflix or Paramount or maybe no one. They don't know what's going to happen. So, beyond my wish listing here, I'll close with that even if they were going to greenlight a Regency show, we would not hear about the first thing about it until 2 years from now. Late 2027. When they'd have a better idea of what's going on behind the scenes and what the audience reaction is and all of that. So I'm not worried about it. If you want my one-sentence answer, it's, are you upset that the show is ending with Season 4? No. If Rhaenyra was kept around longer, it would be stretching her material thin. My hope is we get a Regency show. One line. I sure hope we get a Regency show as a direct sequel. And addendum to that, parentheses, I really hope they don't cram The Hour of the Wolf into the second half of Season 4. Like, that should be the first season of the Aftermath show, which is functionally Season 5. And they've talked about this before. They said, oh, maybe we'll make other shows and still call it House of the Dragon. They're not going to make a Targaryen conquest show and call it House of the Dragon. as an anthology. They're going to call it Targaryen Conquest. Maybe they'll even still call it House of the Dragon, The Aftermath. I don't know. I'm not a marketing guy. But just, I'm not worrying about it, because even if it does turn out, we wouldn't hear now. We'd hear about it in 2 years. So until then, when even HBO doesn't know what's going on, we'll have to wait and see. One thing I will leave with, though, is encouraging things that Condell said on his podcast. A separate thing, this was a clip that someone took out, put on Twitter, it circulated a lot. He emphasized just how much HBO is very confident in the Westeros franchise overall, and they are doubling down on it for the future. That he said both the head of HBO, Casey Bloys, and their drama department head, Francesca Orsi, are very confident in it, very excited about it. This is one of our flagships alongside DC Comics. But he said that they are worried about, quote, oversaturation. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, what happened to Marvel. When Marvel shows got bad by 2023, and they've made reforms since, but yeah, I can see they were worried about oversaturation. They didn't want to dump out too many shows at once. By way of comparison, even the current, DC universe that James Gunn is putting together has a rule in place. No more than 2 live-action shows per year, no more than 2 animated shows per year, no more than 2 movies live-action per year. They're setting a limit for that. And my thing is, of course, well, yeah, 2 seasons per year, but because it takes 2 years to make these things, like maybe 1 year could have House of the Dragon, then the second year could have 2 smaller Dunk and Egg scale shows. You can have 3 active shows if one of them is taking a year off. Just no more than 2 TV seasons per year is what I'm saying, But the point is, he said they're worried about oversaturation and they want to pick things, but they really want to do this forever. I mean, the question someone asked him was, I heard, are they doing a Robert's Rebellion spinoff? Like, we suspect that the movie that they've only just started talking about, and they said, we're toying with the idea of doing a theatrical movie and just early talks, so you don't even have a writer attached yet. Process of elimination, we're pretty sure if you're going to do a movie, it's going to be Robert's Rebellion. Maybe as a trilogy, maybe as one movie, something, just in that region of stuff. And Condell replied, well, I haven't heard anything specific. I haven't been in talks with them recently about specific prequels. I'm just focusing what I'm doing. But yeah, we considered everything, and I just honestly think they want to do Robert's Rebellion. They want to do Targaryen Conquest. They just don't want to oversaturate. That they're planning it out as phases. We must respect the phases. That Phase 2 is Targaryen Conquest, Nymeria, and hopefully a Regency show, and the second half of Dunk and Egg. And Phase 3 is like 10 years from now, so we'll figure that out as we go, because they're alternating years for certain things. But with HBO this confident in the franchise, we will have to see 2 years from now what is going on with, are we going to get a direct sequel on all the surviving characters? And another problem with waiting that long to see how well does Season 3 do, because it comes out in the summer, it's right after the Emmy cutoff for Emmy eligibility. So it's coming out this summer. We won't even know if it got Emmy nominations until July of 2027. And we won't know if it won them until September of 27. And awards do affect HBO's mental calculus on how do we keep doing with a franchise or not. So that's really why late 2027 will be something to keep an eye on. But on top of that, also because they're worried about the merger and other things that could happen with that. Just my one-line response is, well, Season 4 is the final season. I hope we get that direct sequel on the Regency era. So this isn't necessarily bad. I don't want to stretch Rhaenyra's material out, and just having enough time to think of it myself, okay, but I'm looking ahead to that with cautious optimism.